when attention to signals and fronts doesn't get the job done. This is for ISTDP therapists who aren't achieving the results they're aiming for and might be questioning certain aspects of their approach. Recently, I've noticed a trend where therapists focus almost exclusively on identifying spontaneous patient sighs, commonly referred to as signals, and determining the front of the patient's system. This assessment involves deciding whether feelings, anxiety, or defenses are the most prominent feature in the patient's current presentation. While assessing striated muscle signals, such as sighs, and using them as an orienting framework, along with evaluating the front of the system, can be highly effective when integrated with other elements of ISTDP and fundamental relationship-building principles. An overly narrow focus risks reducing the therapeutic relationship to a one-dimensional fishing expedition. This happens when the therapist prioritizes their agenda of accessing the unconscious over truly engaging with the patient as a person. When is a laser focus on signals and fronts appropriate? Before answering, let me provide some context. In a recent supervision session, a trainee was struggling to understand their patient's presentation. They were trying to determine whether feelings, anxiety, or defenses were most prominent. From one perspective, it seemed the patient was using defenses, but intuitively, the trainee felt the patient was being open and forthcoming. Sure enough, the patient was discussing significant material about their suffering and interpersonal conflicts, offering a clear, phenomenological picture of their difficulties. However, because the patient wasn't emoting or experiencing strong feelings, the trainee misinterpreted this openness as defensiveness. This misunderstanding underscores the importance of assessing signals and fronts in the appropriate context. A narrow focus on the triangle of conflict is only appropriate after foundational work has been completed, and it's time to move into a phase of major mobilization of the unconscious. Before reaching that stage, it's vital to use a broader understanding of the triangle of conflict, one that includes collaborative gestures at the bottom corner. Collaborative gestures do not necessarily involve the patient emoting, but they nevertheless signify the patient's openness and honesty in furthering the therapeutic work. They may include the patient giving a clear phenomenological description of their problems. They may include the patient spontaneously discussing emotionally charged themes that shine a light into stimuli of feelings. They reveal what has been previously concealed. These gestures can occur on both a conscious and unconscious level. They are deemed to arise from the unconscious therapeutic alliance if they arise truly spontaneously, and from the conscious alliance if they arise in response to prompts from the therapist. In the phase of major mobilization, therapists rely on a narrower, more snug assessment of the triangle of conflict, using unremitting pressure to mobilize intense experiences of complex feelings and impulses. Any detours, whether anxiety regulation or defense clarification and challenge, are temporary measures to be abandoned as soon as possible in favor of refocusing on an unrelenting march towards unlocking the unconscious through more pressure. This standard vertical ISTDP approach is effective when the patient is ready for major mobilization but is unsuitable earlier in the treatment process. Common pitfalls of a premature, narrow focus. Another recent example illustrates this point. A trainee presented work with a patient frustrated with her husband. When the therapist asked how she experienced her frustration, the patient responded by analyzing her typical behaviors. The trainee attempted to clarify this defense and press further for the experience of frustration, assuming this was what the unconscious indicated was needed. However, further review revealed that the patient was not interested in exploring her feelings. She believed she was already in touch with them and wanted practical advice for changing her husband. The therapist and patient were working at cross purposes. The patient's external focus and compliance with the therapist's intrapsychic focus indicated that the conscious therapeutic alliance needed work. The patient needed help, recognizing that her focus on changing her husband was unhelpful. Only if and when the patient came to see that this strategy covered up feelings and that this avoidance contributed to her suffering, could the work potentially shift toward a more vertical approach. Lessons from Davenloo's work. These examples highlight how an overly narrow focus on signals and fronts can derail the therapeutic process when foundational work hasn't been completed. Davenloo's transcripts from the 1990s and earlier provide valuable insights into balancing a focus on the conscious and the unconscious. His work reveals a significant focus on understanding the patient's conscious frame of reference and building a conscious therapeutic alliance. This often seemed to take place through insisting on clear and direct communication and leveraging the patient's conscious will to turn against their defenses. In my estimation, rather than myopically focusing on signals and fronts, Davenloo prioritized removing obstacles to emotionally intimate and direct communication. He often helped patients link their defenses to the suffering that brought them to therapy. Collaborative gestures, as mentioned earlier, were a key indicator for Davenloo. When patients spontaneously directed the focus to emotionally charged topics, he interpreted this as a sign that the unconscious therapeutic alliance had been activated. Once patients were sufficiently connected to their feelings and honest about the topic at hand, he often shifted focus, indicating that he believed that the work on that front was complete. In summary, in my view, Davenloo's earlier work prioritized building emotionally intimate relationships rather than singularly focusing on major mobilization. Central to his approach was helping patients become aware of their defenses, fostering both conscious and unconscious collaboration, and addressing resistance to experiencing and acknowledging honest emotions and realities. These elements formed the foundation of his therapeutic process, allowing deeper work to unfold naturally when the patient was properly prepared. For ISTDP therapists, the key takeaway is this: assessing signals and fronts are critical tools, but they must be applied in the right context. A narrow focus on these elements before foundational work has been completed risks alienating the patient and compromising the therapeutic relationship. Instead, take the time to establish a robust, conscious therapeutic alliance, attend to the conscious mind, and prioritize emotionally intimate communication before transitioning into major mobilization. Foundational work includes attention to the channels of unconscious anxiety discharge, size, and an accurate assessment of where the patient is on the triangle of conflict. But the focus on these things is not singular. As I mentioned earlier, alongside feelings and impulses at the bottom corner, it is essential to recognize that collaborative gestures, whether spontaneous or prompted, are integral to this stage. A patient who is openly and honestly discussing their suffering and interpersonal conflicts is likely collaborating. Misinterpreting their openness as defensiveness simply because they are not emoting is a common but avoidable mistake. By adopting a broader understanding of the triangle of conflict and focusing on phases preceding major mobilization, ISTDP therapists can honor the complexity of the method, incorporate common factors, strengthen the conscious therapeutic alliance, and create the conditions needed for major mobilization to be effective and therapeutic. By working in this way, we ensure that we are working with rather than on the patient. That will be all for today. Thank you for watching. Till next time, goodbye for now.